All right. Looks like we're live. We're live and on the screen, man. Let's do some housekeeping real quick. Make sure you're liking and sharing the stream for us. We appreciate it. I'm gonna grab my phone here and do it myself as well. So while you're doing it, I'll do it as well. I appreciate it. Appreciate it. Um, should be streaming from the actual Saginaw Cap page, and I do see it. I do see it. I'm gonna put a heart on there and I'm gonna share it as well. Tell your folks to tune in, tune in. We got a great one for you. We got a great one for you. All right. Seeing the shares out there. Thank y'all. Thank y'all so much. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. All right. All right. Thank you so much, Mrs. Bulls. I appreciate you. Thank you so much. All right. Man, what's going on, y'all? What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? As you can see, my name is on the screen, but if you're just listening and not looking, I'll tell you what my name is. My name is Jeff Bulls. I am the president of Saginaw CAP. CAP stands for Community Alliance for the People. We are a advocacy organization here in the city of Saginaw, well, based in the city of Saginaw, but we're a statewide organization now. We kind of leveling up. So, man, thank y'all for your prayers and your support. We can't do this without the community. It's in our name. We are Community Alliance for the People. That's y'all. And so, man, thank you so much. Thank you so much for supporting us. We've been at this since the pandemic, y'all. We came together in 2020 and we hit the ground running and we ain't stopped running yet. And guess what? For y'all, we ain't going to stop running. We got more work to do and we're going to do it. And so we appreciate you all the support that you've given us, whether it's on our social media, the things that we do in the community, our CAP talks and our other forums, our block party. Man, you guys have supported us 100%, and we don't take it for granted. We thank you so much, man. So, man, before I get into what I got going on here, man, please feel free to leave comments in the chat, and we'll get to them. I see some in there already. I see Mrs. Bull is already in there. I see, swear to God, one of my CAP folks, somebody that's real deal special to me, Miss Rose. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. Love you, sis. Man. But again, thank y'all so much. Leave us some comments, man, and we're gonna get to them as we can. As you know, if you've never tuned in to the show, this is CAP Talks Live. And so, man, without further ado, I'm gonna start off with my opening monologue. What's on my mind? I know y'all ready for that, right? So, man, look, I haven't been on for a couple months, man, so I got a little catching up to do. The first thing I wanted to talk about is, of course, the election. Man, this election is so important, and we're going to get to that with our guests. So I won't get into that, particular conversation too deep. But I wanted to head it off by simply saying, because I'm watching the landscape out here, I'm watching conversations and things that's happening, around the election, and it's troubling. I'll be honest, because I'm seeing some stuff that we really don't need to be talking about. And those conversations that are happening, it's blocking the conversations that should be happening. Why are we not talking about, as it pertains to candidates, especially local candidates? I don't want to hear about, things that don't matter as it pertains to city council and things of that nature. Why are we not talking about the lack of housing in our community? Why is that not a staple in the conversation? I don't want to hear from a candidate if they're not talking about the issues. We're talking about lack of housing. Housing is a huge problem in our community, and I'm not hearing nobody talk about it. And that's a problem. That's a problem. When we're talking about elections, we should be talking about issues. And we're not talking about issues. We're getting into personality conflicts. This one don't like that one. And I don't care about none of that. Not me. Again, this is CAP, Community Alliance for the People. If it ain't about the people and the issues that we're dealing with, I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to hear about who don't like who. I don't want to hear about that. We got issues. We got housing issues. Man, let's talk about the policing in our community. Like we had a forum on that. We had a CAP talk on policing, and we're still no closer to a resolution as it pertains to what's happening in our community and how our community is being over-policed by these state police. We still haven't dealt with that. I need these candidates to start talking about those things. And oh, by the way, the elephant in the room, we haven't talked about ARPA. And in particular, how those $52 million that came to our community, how it largely hasn't impacted our community. That's a referendum on who was sitting in those seats. And we should be talking about that. And if you want my vote, you know what I mean? I can't, get into, endorsing candidates. But in a general sense, I can say, hey, if we're not talking about ARPA and where we failed, and in particular where certain folks have failed us sitting in those seats, and yet you want another vote to sit in that seat, we got to talk. We got to have a whole conversation about that. And let me shout out somebody that I need to shout out, because who got left out of that ARPA conversation was Mission in the City, somebody, organization that's near and dear to Saginaw CAP. And they didn't get $1 of ARPA funds. I got a problem with that. And I got a problem who sat in those 9 seats and didn't look at Mission in the City. By the way, an anchor organization in the city of Saginaw. I don't want to hear about no other organizations, all these big organizations that got money. And that's no slight to anybody else that got money. It's simply to say that $52 million of ARPA funds should have impacted our community far more than it did. And that's a referendum on who was making those decisions. And that should impact who you vote for. That should impact who you vote for. Not only that issue, but issues, period. Don't get into personality conflicts. I don't have to like you to vote for you. It's about the issues for me. It's about the issues for me. And so we have to have that conversation in our community about, why do you vote for someone? Why do you vote for someone? Don't vote for them because you like them. You know what I mean? Like, that ain't got nothing to do with why you vote for someone. Because I can like you and disagree with your policies and not want to vote for you and still like you. And still like you. We have to separate that. Just because you're cool don't mean you get my vote. And I hope that's understood. Moving on, though. It speaks to, what I just said. It kind of speaks to, the state of our community and why we vote certain ways and why we don't, or why we even, pull back from voting altogether. Why don't we get our bang for our buck when it comes to voting? And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you exactly why. It's because we don't have our own agenda. We really don't have our own agenda. And that's problematic. Like, how can I come to the table and say, hey, talk about voting and this and that? I don't have anything to demand of you. That ain't a good thing, y'all. We have to come together as a community and figure out what are the core issues in the Black community that we want to bring to the table when it comes time to talk to candidates and talk to elected officials, whether they're sitting elected officials or whether they're trying to be sitting elected officials. We have to come to the table with demands. And if we don't, we'll continue to be at the back of the line. And when we finally come up to the front, all the money is gone. All of the favors and all of the things, they're gone. They're just like, hey, thanks for voting. Like, we'll continue to lose out in this process if we don't become policy centered. And that's really all I have to say at this point. I hope y'all hear me. And thank you so much. And I'll move on from there. Appreciate y'all. Without further ado, man, because I'm excited. I'm so excited to have my people coming on, man. And I got to bring on somebody first. I'll bring them on as they come. But this first guy I got to bring on as I click him onto my screen. He needs no real introduction, but I'll try. I'll try. As he says that he's the lead custodian over at World Outreach Campus. Man, the venerable, the wonderful, the great, the newly appointed Bishop Hurley Coleman. Bishop, how you doing?
I'm great, Jeff. How you doing, man?
Man, I'm hanging in there.
Good, man. I hear you struggling trying to figure out how to categorize me. Don't worry about it. I do the same thing. I'm really just that guy, man, trying to respond to what I see as issues and needs wherever they are. Try to play a role to not just discuss things, but try to make changes happen.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate you. I appreciate you coming on. I got another somebody that's I know him a little bit. I'm gonna bring him on the screen real quick as well. Man, too many titles. I don't even know what hat he's wearing today. But
that guy right there.
I'm wearing a Saginaw hat.
But he's wearing a few hats. But I think the hat he's wearing right now, I believe he's the vice president of
whatever
community relations and marketing for the Saginaw Spirit.
Yep.
None other than another special person to me, Mr. Jimmy Greene. Jimmy, how you doing?
I'm good. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir. I got you.
Good.
Look good, Jimmy.
You too, Bishop.
Thank you. I'm glad you said it back to me, man, because if you didn't, I was gonna be bad.
I'm in a nice mood tonight.
Hey, man, we appreciate it. We appreciate it. Hey, man, I brought y'all on, man, because and I know that y'all, man, I talk to y'all about this stuff all the time, but I wanted to share that with our broader community because I think you guys have unique perspectives on what is, a pivotal election season. Bishop, if I could ask you first, man, man, how important is this election, for our community? Like, what should we know about the impact our community could have on this election?
Well, the first thing I want to do is say that I think that you're grounding this conversation by considering local issues is a perfect place to start, especially when you say that one of the biggest challenges is not that we have complaints, but that we have complaints with no plans, because that is critically an issue, because even the Bible says faith without works is dead. And when you ground the conversation about this election based on local issues, and then you consider the fact that in the state of Michigan, the last presidential election was won by 11,000 votes. And in the state of Michigan, 277,000 Black voters did not vote. And you narrow that down to the city of Saginaw, narrow that down to Saginaw County, and you look at the number of registered potential voters that there were in Saginaw County that were over 100,000, and you got less than 30,000. So, but what it really means is that if we actually thought about it, we could control our own destiny. There is every single council person, every single county commissioner is going to be hoping that they can win, even with a hair's thread, a small number of votes. What if only 35 or 40 votes would change any particular election? And then, as I said to pastors, and you don't tell the people in your church, and you got 35 members of your congregation who you didn't encourage to go vote, and the person who will make decisions about which funds come to their community will have lost by the number of people that you didn't talk to. That's how critical it is. It's very, and then on the bigger picture, we've never faced the potential of losing so much, not because of just bad leadership, but because of failed leadership on the national level. And I don't care how much you don't like what the party in place. For me personally, if this election goes to the other side, we'll be wishing we had days like this.
Man, yeah, that's powerful. That's powerful. I mean, before I ask the next question, my other person just showed up. Somebody who I revere heavily.
You ought to let everybody respond to that.
Y'all might know her. Y'all might know her. Somebody who wears a few hats too. She was the chief health advisor in Flint. Man, I can go down the list, but right now she's the president of the State Board of Education, none other than our candidate. I still say that, Dr. Pam Pugh. Miss Pam, how you doing?
I am doing amazing. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, I am doing amazing, and it is so wonderful to be here with your esteemed guests. And just always good to be with you, Jeff, and your leadership speaks volume. And I will tell you, Jeff told me to get on at 7:15, so I've been enjoying the conversation of the important people before he let me in. But happy to join.
Thank you so much. Man, Jimmy, tell me something about the election. Tell me something. Like what you thinking? Like I know we've had a lot of, this county has, all of a sudden become a bellwether. A lot of
not
media,
all of a sudden. Not all of a sudden.
a lot of media seem to be descending on Saginaw County. Man, what are you seeing out there on the ground? Like what can you tell us about what you're seeing?
Well, I mean, Saginaw County has been the bellwether for the last 6 elections. When you look at the presidential campaigns in particular, Saginaw County is unique in the sense that it looks like Michigan, and most counties don't. So when you just consider Saginaw City, Saginaw Township, Hemlock, St. Charles, Freeland, Bridgeport, I mean, it looks like Michigan, where most municipalities look like they do. Midland looks like Midland, Bay looks like Bay. And the further north you go, I mean, you don't have a diverse population like you do in Saginaw. So you get such a reflection of Michigan values and principles right here in this county, which is why everybody comes here. It's a great sampling of political talking points. I mean, the election is no question about it. I still think the most powerful elections are those held on a local basis. I mean, from a big picture standpoint, the national elections always seem to dominate the news, and we sometimes miss where the real impact is, and it's right at your city council level and your county commissioners and those kind of folks in particular. But we did something a little bit different this year. I don't even know what I call myself anymore, to be honest with you, because I still think that principles and values that I had back in the 80s and 90s are still shaped the same way. I've always been sort of a fiscal conservative and a social liberal, but that was comfortable with certain Republicans back in the day, which, by the way, Democrats would certainly embrace now too. They would welcome those Republicans back, the Romneys and the McCains and Bushes, and they just seem to have bad policies, the Democrats, but they weren't bad people. Well, you can't say that nowadays. These are bad people, and you can't get away with, yeah, but I like their policies, which seems to be some springhole. We did something, Nikki Haley was for us the last gasp at what traditional Republicanism looked like. So when Nikki Haley bailed out and her supporters, there were 113 of us here in the state, I co-chaired her campaign here in Michigan, even though I was helping a number of Democrats win primaries and offices simply because I believe in checks and balances in our system. When she left and endorsed Trump, there was this idea that those people who supported Nikki Haley would follow her to Trump. That was a terrible narrative put out there. So myself and Bill Nolan, who worked very intimately with the Rick Snyder campaign, we felt like we had to come out of the shadows and make it abundantly clear that we were not doing that. So we formed a group, Republicans for Kamala Harris. It wasn't necessarily an embracement of her, more so than it was a rebuke of him. And somebody asked me that. They said, well, how do you sacrifice your principles and values? I'm like, that's easy. He doesn't have any of our principles and values. So, we weren't losing anything. And yeah, I've lived in a Democratic controlled Michigan for a lot of years. We've had a few sparse moments where we've had Republicans, but, I always say this, the shoes might get tighter, but at least I can walk. And and I can live with it. I can't live with a presidency that has no values, no principles, no core values, and certainly does not reflect the kind of republicanism and conservatism that I kind of grew up as an adult in. So, it really is important because I think it shapes this country for years on out. You can't look at Trump's 4 years without looking at the 8 years that follow that with a potential J.D. Vance presidency. So don't be so short-sighted to look at Trump and say, well, we can deal with his 4 years. Incumbents have a tough time losing, and I think it paints a picture of this country. I shudder to think what we look like. So,
absolutely. Charles Allen in my comments. Thank you all for the comments. He says Jimmy Greene just said he's a Republican for Harris. I just had to throw that in there.
Well, it's funny because the group of us we were Republicans for Nikki Haley. So we weren't going to shed that title for convenience. We thought it was important that if we were going to be Republicans for Haley, then we needed to be Republicans for Harris. And I mean, I've gotten I can't even share with you the number of emails I've gotten from Republicans, and some of them are incredibly nasty. But I've been there before, so no big
absolutely
deal.
No doubt. So Pam, let me ask you. And so we get to the election, this current election, and we've seen a lot of different things that have happened. Some things in the primary. Now we're coming towards the general. One of those things is citizen engagement, or in some ways disengagement. Mm-hmm. Like, can you speak to that? Like what as it pertains to engagement, and maybe the lack of engagement, like why is it that way? In some respects there is a lot of engagement, in some respects it's not. Like what are you seeing in that area that you can speak to?
Well, my co-presenters really laid out the case for why it is important that everyone gets involved in this election. As you mentioned, I ran for Congress in the primary. And I say that to say that I have so many people who are still asking me if I won, still saying that they're planning to vote for me. It used to be almost like an everyday occurrence. Now it's about a once a week occurrence. We cannot take it for granted. We cannot assume that everyone is in tune to this race, even though we turn on the TV, every corner we turn, there is an ad or a sign. There are a lot of people, as we all know, that are dealing with everyday life situations and are not thinking about November 5th, are not thinking about October 26th through November 3rd, early voting. And so it's incumbent upon each of us and everyone to be calling and talking, stopping, having conversations with people and making sure that they are engaged and that they do know how important it is. Everyone has stake in this election. We hear so much about Project 2025. This is an agenda that's so toxic. It's so extreme that even Donald Trump is now trying to separate himself from his own agenda. We can talk about a woman's right to choose. We can talk about many issues. We can talk about climate. We can talk about the extreme weather patterns. But there's a call to totally eliminate the Department of Education. There is so much that is packed into this agenda. There is an agenda to take dollars that should go to our babies, our children, their education, take those dollars and put them into privatization, carrying out a Betsy DeVos agenda. We have to make sure that people understand what's at stake, make sure that people understand. I've subscribed a little bit more to TikTok. So it is scary because when you see some of the mis and disinformation that is going on, I saw something as crazy as to say that it is Kamala Harris who is pushing the Project 2025 agenda. So we have to be the ones that speak to our people. We are the ones that are trusted. It's no Calvary. No one's going to come in here. People have, rightfully so, in many situations, grown disenchanted with both parties. So it is us to make sure that we are talking to our people, making sure that they know that November 5th is coming up, that we are all on this ballot. Issues that are important to all of us is on this ballot.
Awesome. Thank you. Bishop, let me ask you, because, us with Saginaw Cap, we did a Souls to the Polls campaign. And that had some impact for sure. How much is to be debated. I wanted to ask you though, in a larger sense, speaking for the Black church, like what is the impact that the Black church can have in this election that you can speak to?
Well, just think about this. If we just take the numbers of all of the Black churches in Saginaw, just take the numbers, nothing but numbers, all of the membership of all the Black churches in Saginaw. I want you to hear what I'm about to say. If you take the numbers of the members of all the Black churches in Saginaw, they would total more than the number of people who cast their ballot in the last primary election from the city. Maybe I didn't say that well enough. If you take the number of all of the Black churches in Saginaw County, and add all of their members, that number would be more than the total number of individuals that voted in the city of Saginaw in the last election. How important is that? There are 900,000 African Americans in the state of Michigan. 900,000. If 20% of those 900,000 people are members of Black churches, that number is more than enough. That's more than the number of votes that won the last presidential election in the state of Michigan. That's how simple it is. And then for me, I get criticism. People, it's really strange that I get a lot of criticism from Black people who say, well, I don't think the preacher should be talking about politics. I don't think you should be in the pulpit I don't think you should be there. That you're not a politician. I got an email today from a white evangelical pastor who sent out an email across the country. You know what it was about? He wrote a book about how Christians should vote in this election. And he used their talking points to say, this is how, if you're a Christian, you should vote. And if you don't vote like this, then you're not a Christian. I promise you, I have tendencies to agree with a lot of the social, moral positions of conservative America. But I have a high tendency and propensity to agree with the liberal programs that serve the people that I serve. So indeed, as a person, as a pastor and a churchman, I may not have a political home, but I do have political leanings that look at serving people. So at the end of the day, if it hadn't been for Black pastors in Reconstruction, after the Civil War ended, if it hadn't been for Black pastors, those hundreds of people that were elected to office would not have been elected. Most of the first elected Black officials in national offices that went to Washington, D.C. after the Civil War were pastors. They were clergymen. They were Black leaders. And those leaders provided the leadership for the community. How important is it? It's critically important, which is why it's always trying to be discounted.
Thank you for that. Thank you for
I know
that.
that was a long answer, but I apologize.
No, it's great. Well, you know me, I'll tune in. I'll just park and listen. So it's all good to me. Man, Jimmy, and I wanted to also ask this of Pam as well, following. There's a sentiment, out there that I know that I push for, and that's the involvement of young people in the voting process. And I wanted to ask, what do you think, is there a missing element of young people in the voting process? And if so, why do you think that is?
Well, I'll take it first, and then defer to Dr. Pugh right after that. But and I think Bishop makes a really good point, but he's missing something really, really critical to this, and it's the idea that we are not a sane people. That used to be the case in the past. You're absolutely right. We are a uniquely different people now. I think it's probably one of the problems with Democratic messaging is that they are treating us like a monolithic group,
Right.
and that is dangerous. There are Black folks who are just as concerned about high taxes and immigration and all the talking points that a lot of Republicans talk about, and so to remove those people from that process and assume that they agree with the group messaging is hugely problematic. I always say this, and I think it's important that when you look at Donald Trump, he appeals to a young group. And if you look at his demographics, it's frightening. And it appeals to our group of people. You know why? Because they don't relish history. They're past it. If you talk to young people today, they're like, that's way in the past. Like they don't remember the civil rights movement. We aren't teaching that in school like we used to. They're past it. And so if you're talking to young people now, and I'm blessed to have young people, young children, well, not young, but they're young adults. The messages from my father that were taught to me and the messages that were taught to my older kids, they don't resonate anymore. They just don't. They see the world differently than they do. Even like LGBTQ plus, those folks today, the young people, they're like, what's the big deal? That big deal is our generation. I've often said this, and I know it's a cruel thing to say, but I think the world becomes a much better place when a generation dies off. And I mean that from both sides of the party, too. There are still people hanging on to things that these young people just don't relish. They just don't galvanize. They don't care. And so when you talk about the disengagement of them, unless you appeal to them about issues that affect them, like even in the city of Saginaw and the county for that matter, there are too many old people making decisions that young people don't want to live in. I've said it 1,000 times. I'm talking about my generation. Like I believe the city, the county, the country should look like the people that want to live in it, the people that are actually going to build it. And until you start putting young people in positions where they're preaching to us about the kind of community they want to live in, you're always going to find them disengaged. And because they don't have the same problems we do. And so that's just I know it's a long answer to a short question, but I think until you start to see more of the young people building the city, the county, and a country they want to live and stay in, you're always going to have a problem with disengagement of young voters.
Absolutely. Dr. Pugh?
Sorry, I was so mesmerized and listening to Dr. Jimmy. There's a new law that's on the books that calls for the Department of Education departments, or local LEAs, and the Department of State to do all that they can to pre-register, offer young people 16 and up to pre-register. And so some of us were out and in the schools and helping students to become aware of this law and this opportunity. I spoke to about 30. I went to one group and I was talking to you about this, Jeff, and there's probably about 50 students that were in that assembly, and there were a few 18-year-olds that were there, and a bunch of 16-year-olds. And many of them said that when I asked before we began the conversation, they said that they were not that intrigued with or not that interested in voting. That is concerning. And I go back to my first opening conversation is we cannot depend on the cavalry to come, those big name people that used to be able to move the needle and get everyone inspired. It is going to be relationship building that has to be done outside of the election season. We've got a lot of work to do. And I will say that I agree that we have a lot of people who do not understand our culture. To Bishop Coleman's point about the Black church, I would go farther and say that there are those who not just disregard, but have worked to dismantle the power of the Black church because it gets too complicated. It's a different thing when people can say, go out and vote for this person because they have this letter behind, a R or D behind their name. It takes a lot more work, relationship building, being able to prove what have you done for me lately. And that takes a lot. And sometimes people in the parties don't have the time to explain that. And to Jimmy's point, Dr. Jimmy's point, Donald Trump was in Detroit today. I've gotten notices that that JD Vance was in Dearborn, and they're very crafty with their messaging as well. And so we've got a lot of work to do. We want our young people, we have to have our young people involved. They make up over 50% of the vote at this time. And we have to begin having those conversations. I will say that in that assembly, and I see Charles Allen, his organization was with me. And so by the time we were done with that conversation, there was one young man who sent word back that he wanted to hear more. It was something that we said to him that made him want to hear more, and he wanted to get more involved in the electoral process. So that was one big step that may have looked like a little step, but we've got a lot to do to make sure that we undo some of the things that these young people have grown up seeing, and making sure that they understand what it is that we intend to do, and have those deep relationships with them.
Hey, Jeff,
Jeff, I just wanted to say something real quick before you say something.
I'm going to say something real quick, but after Jimmy get through real quick.
Well, no, real quick. This is what Dr. Pugh was alluding to, and she said something earlier about this. You remember the last big giant march on Washington and the one last on Lansing with young people? It was when they were talking about getting rid of TikTok. It was when they were talking about getting rid of TikTok. Think about that for a moment. And yet we're not using that tool. You're not using that tool. That if you want to get young people engaged, take something away from them. Like all the stuff we're talking about, they don't care. They're way past that. Never happened to them. Talk about taking something from them. You want to get them engaged. That'll be the way to do it. Bishop.
Well, Jimmy, you were right down the same lane that I was going to go down, but I was gonna say it like this. I get criticized often because I say black too much. People say I say black too much because, I ought to be talking about everybody. Everybody ought to. No. See what TikTok and what X and what Facebook and what all those things missed was those years when you couldn't do it. Mm-hmm. Those years when you couldn't, the experiences that into any restaurant, not being comfortable going on any side of town. Those are not the lived experiences of the generations that we're talking about. So I'm constantly saying black so I can make you look at yourself. So you'll understand that this is really about that. And I get frustrated because I get criticized by us about being black. Now I'll say this, and I have a lot of people that I deal with who are not melanated like me. But I don't have anybody telling me not to say, well, you can't say that the Hispanic, don't say Latino, don't say, Asian in Pacific. No. Why is it that every time I talk about my needs, I got to include everybody? No, I'm telling black folk that the reason we don't get what we need to have, we don't have our plans, we don't work together, we don't stick together, we don't go a second time, we don't like to meet, but it's on us because let me throw this out. If you think that Michigan is the only place where this problem is, in Georgia, 530,000 African Americans didn't vote. In Wisconsin, the president won by 23,000 votes in 2016. 93,000 African Americans didn't vote. In North Carolina, the president won in 2016 by 173,000 votes. 233,000 African Americans didn't vote. If we did what we were supposed to do, forget about all that other stuff. Forget about all the programs. Forget about who did what. Let me tell you what we need to do. We need to show up and show that this is how many people we bring to the polls. And let's quit talking about it. But sadly, we won't do that. Now, Jimmy says that, and Dr. Pugh says that the difference is that the generation that we're talking about, the young people who vote, don't have the same interest that we have. I beg to differ you because everybody eats. Everybody has to have a house. Everybody needs a job. I don't care how old you are, you need to be safe. So there is something that we all have in common. Okay. And I think that if we can figure out ways to focus on that, because maybe it's the fact that we're not using the vehicles that they, like you say, Jimmy, we're not using the vehicles that they listen to. They don't see us like they see the other people on TikTok and those other messages. They ought to be hearing from me.
Those young people live at home and eat with their parents. I'm telling you, you're not taking something away from them. And look at our generation. You know why we were mobilized? Because we had nothing and they were taking away even that.
Yeah.
Voting rights. There were so many things that we had at risk. And it was compelling. And to Dr. Pugh's point, we had a John Lewis and a Jesse Jackson. And then we had a bunch of people who were no matter which side of the spectrum you're on, we had a Malcolm X or a Louis Farrakhan. I mean, we had these dynamic leaders out there reminding us, no matter what your religion was, no matter what your politics was, that you were going to lose something. And we felt it because it was real. Now tell that to a 19, 20-year-old. What are they losing? What? That's my whole point. Like, what exactly are they losing? The only way you galvanize people is when they feel a risk of losing something. There's very little for them to, and I'm talking about in their world, there's very little for them to gain because it's already there. They've got more freedoms than we ever dreamed of. We also had a real press with real newspapers and real unbiased news. They don't have any of that stuff. We're talking to young people like they were us. They're not. And I'm not saying that as an indictment. I'm saying that almost like a success. We created a better version of ourselves. The difference is we gave them more tools than we ever had. And our problem is we don't know how to use the tools that they have. And until we start speaking their language and using the tools that are so valuable to them, until we make them understand that you risk something, you will lose something. This is all just old heads talking.
I think I don't really see us saying too much different. I will continue to repeat that we live in a congressional district that has a poverty rate of 9%. So that is better than the state. That's better than the U.S. Poverty level. Not that we want to see anyone in poverty, but when we look at cities like Saginaw, Michigan, and Flint, Michigan, those poverty rates go up to 36%. And we know that poverty is linked to so many things. We can look at the violent crime rates. We know that we have some of the highest violent crime rates, and that correlates to those income, those poverty levels. When I continue to hear middle class, working class, there are so many of us Black folks who are not working. We don't fit into those categories. And it's not because we don't want to. It's not because we don't have the skills to. It's not because we don't have the education to do so. We are looking for those policy and decision makers who are going to push to make sure that there is the room for us to bring our lived experiences, to bring our education, and be able to utilize it in a way that uplifts our communities that we know how to do best. And so we have to, again, make sure that young people can hear us talking to them and about them and about the things that matter to them. We've seen the first this, we've seen the first that, we've seen the first Black, the first woman, the first, but what are we going to do different is what they're looking for. And it's not going to be in campaign ads. It's going to be relationship and or people like ourselves who they have relationship with, who can speak to how does this election affect them? How does the person that are running and that we are advocating for and want to have the job, how are they going to deliver, and what is it that they've done in the past? And so I think that is what I mean. The difference is that we have a generation that have so much at their fingertips.
Yep.
And there's so much misinformation, disinformation. I have a pastor by the name of Bishop Coleman, and I remember one day he said, it used to be back in the day when people lied, they would at least blink or, make a look off or something. Now people can just say anything and it walks and it carries. And so that's why we have to make sure that this generation can build relationship with people that they can trust, and can that we
agree.
I guess I'll throw this in too, because I think that while they have a lot of different advantages, I think there are some things that we aren't speaking to. I think my grandparents and even my parents, the cost of their house isn't the cost of these houses.
No.
The cost of their education, and my parents didn't even go to college. My grandparents either. The cost to go to college now isn't the same. There's in even just bare necessities, the cost of goods and services are higher than they ever have been. I guess I want to ask any of you, can we speak to that? And how can we, at least in the political conversation, and we talk about who we support or not, like, how do we bring that conversation, to the political spectrum? Because I think we talk about, of course, when you get into ads and things of that nature, you get into millionaires and billionaires, and then you hear the terms middle class and working class. I think there's another class below that we're not speaking to. And how do we get that into the conversation? Because there are some people that are really hurting out there, and the pandemic only made it worse for them. How do we speak to that?
I'm one of those stupid people who watch so many channels and so many news shows, and I'm a political wonk, right? I'm saying that only to say this. I see commercials time and time again, over and over ad nauseum. If you show me somebody 19 and 20 and 21, you can start counting on my one hand. I am simply saying that sometimes a lot of what we're doing right now is predictable because we've ostracized the people that we keep encouraging to vote. Where are they? We don't even show them. They're nowhere to be seen. I mean, look at us. There's 4 people on here. There's nobody 20 years old on here, 24 years old. We're talking for them, through them, at them. You ain't 24 years old. you you know what I'm saying though. I mean, really, it's an unconscious thing that we do, and it really, but I pay attention to it all the time. I keep looking for that young voice, that you hear me say it, like Bishop always talks about black, which is rightfully so. I always talk about young, which is to me rightfully so. So if you start tying in black and young, you'll start seeing where the missing element is. I don't care where you look on any news channel, anywhere, for any ad, for any politician, you will not see young people speaking. You will not see young people acknowledged. You will not see young people respected. And then we wonder why young people are disengaged. If you add all three of those attributes together, you got your answer right there. We keep continuously talking at them, through them, and for them. And they're just a little bit smart enough to realize that we don't value them until you should go vote. Well, that's a little late in the game at that point.
Absolutely. So how do we change?
And I'm agreeing with everybody too on they need to be engaged. But I can see, I have 3 daughters who are at that age where I literally took them to their first vote and made them do that. But even then, it felt more, for them it was more obligatory. Even though they have a political dad, it's like, okay, Dad, we'll go. Because they didn't feel that like it was for them. They did that for me. And that's what we have to start talking about. We really do. Like even policy, all this other stuff, like what policies resonate with them? What makes a difference? Right now, young people, when you start talking about housing starts and housing costs and things of that nature, that's there. They're talking about the here and now because they are an immediate gratification generation if there ever was one. We used to like save up for them. We'd have 10-year and 20-year plans, 401ks and IRAs and Roth savings, all those these young people today, they are about tomorrow. They don't want to know nothing about no 10, 20 years from now. We have to start talking to them about tomorrow.
You're on mute.
You're mute.
I want to let y'all in on a secret.
Yeah.
There are a lot of young people that go to church.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. That's not a secret.
There's a lot of young people that go to church, and there's a lot of connections that can be made with young people that go to church. And there's a certain thing about young people that go to church, that get involved in church, that they're involved in other things. There's a high percentage of young people that go to church that are getting scholarships, that are having jobs, that are doing community service, they're doing community outreach. I keep bringing this up because I think that the church, I was talking to somebody just the other day about Dr. Pugh. You remember, FAMU did this study on communities and the anchors of the community and what changed after integration about the anchors of the community. And it was always the case that the church and the black doctor and the local grocery store and the local fraternity organizations and the local black businesses, the community were built around those entities. And I told somebody just the other day that urban renewal destroyed that, because in every major city, the highway, the freeway, the bypass goes right through what used to be strong urban neighborhoods, right? And it was in those places where most of us came from. Some of us, our friends are now the guys and the men and women who are running things. Jimmy, our generation is from people who grew up in neighborhoods that had people doing things. So somehow or another, we've got to recapture that. But in the short term, we don't have the luxury of not trying. And so that means that some of us, like you, Jimmy, like you do all the time, Jeff, like you do, Dr. Pugh, like you do, and like I try to do, we got to be bridges and make young people younger than us comfortable talking to us about what they don't like, so that we can tell them why we feel the way we feel and maybe work together with solutions. My desire, my hope is that over the next few 3 or 4 weeks, that we can inspire generations to make generational voting important. That's my hope, that we can find ways to really activate generations to go vote.
Dr. Pugh, what are we missing in this conversation? I know we talked about a grand number of things, but oftentimes in political conversations, there's that missing middle.
Yeah.
Like what are we missing that you see?
Um, there's a couple of things that are floating around in my mind. Where do I start? We're talking about young people and young people being left out, or young people checking out of the process. I think we need to Bishop Coleman's point, oh, Black people. I think we could recenter this conversation right back there. And I had the opportunity to speak with Madam Vice President last week, and members of her staff and folks here on the campaign asking, we need to see people. We need to make sure that the people who are always counted on to carry that party across the finish line successfully, my party, the Democratic Party, across the line successfully, we need to make sure that we see them. And Saginaw used to be that place where people were checking in, and that we heard from the candidates. And we do need that. We do need the principals to come through. We do want to hear that. And don't get me wrong, because there is a distinct difference between the two candidates. When we look at the dog whistles that are being kicked up again by Donald Trump, just today, he was talking about Detroit, and if Kamala Harris was elected, that she would be, we would see all of America look like Detroit. What does that mean? He was speaking of immigrants just a few days ago, and saying that there's this genetic gene that makes them more apt to commit crime. And then for them to have an echo chamber that carries those messaging and that dog whistle. We are in a time where we definitely see a distinct difference, and we know that we have two candidates that will carry us in a different direction. However, we do need to make sure that we are respected as a community, that our vote is not taken for granted. Our young people need to see us as a community have an insult level. I can't remember which pastor it was, but said that, we have to have an insult level where if we have, or a level where we have our dignity, I think is what my dad says. The pastor said, insult, a level where if we are not being respected, that it's okay if we call that out. And I think that our young people want to see that as well, and want to make sure that we're standing up for our issues as a Black people, and we should not shy away from that.
Jimmy, and I know we're getting at the end, so I'll close us out here shortly. But Jimmy, if you could speak to a voter, as it pertains to this particular election and why it's so important that they actually cast their vote, what would you say to them?
Well, first of all, I'd be talking to my own kids, and what I would suggest to them is the fundamental component about any election, under any set of circumstances, under any policy constraints, is look local. I would engage them locally. These big picture things don't resonate with them in many respects. I mean, you can get them later, but right now it's local. Talk to them about how these elections affect them locally. Talk about, especially here in Saginaw, we just had a unified school. We have this potential medical diamond coming in. What does that mean? Like, what does that mean to young people? It can mean a thriving downtown. It can mean jobs. It can mean housing. It can mean a lot of things. We're not talking to young people about building a community for them and looking at candidates that are speaking that language, that I want to be elected because I want to build a community for you. I say this all the time, that I don't want to live in the community that I built. I want to die in the community my kids do. Now, if people can't understand what that means, it's simple. I think our generation has done a really great job at building a foundation for these young people to build on. But it's important for us to start moving out of the way so that they can ultimately build the kind of community they want to live in. You know what that means for me? A thriving community. It brings a youthfulness. When you build places like Ann Arbor, for example, that community, that college community, people are just younger, just through osmosis. And we are an old place sometimes. It feels old, like we can't even go dancing somewhere. It just feels old. And so until we start getting young people engaged, and I would implore them that this is the city that's yours. You need to be engaged. You need to vote, because ultimately you're going to wind up building the city that you want to live in. So I'd make it a selfish indulgence. You know, one of the things about this generation, and I can say they are selfish. They are all about them. They don't have that big picture like the we are the world that we used to. They're selfish in many respects. And I got to tell you, I'm not so sure that's a bad thing now. The idea that they build something for them that they want to live in and thrive in and work in is not a bad principle to work on, because again, we don't have that history thing. We can go back. Bishop talked about the urban blight, but you know what? They don't remember a city of Saginaw that didn't have 675 in it. They don't remember that stuff. It's 675. It's there. It's always been there all their lives.
Just
So
like they don't ever remember recreation department. And
that's what. Yeah, right. So having those kind of conversations, but you know what, Bishop, you could certainly implore them to build one. You can implore them to do that by getting engaged in their local elections. I think like anything, like that long journey that we used to always hear about, where did it start? With one single step. And in my particular case, I talk to young people about that single step, being engaged in their local politics. Listen to these people that are right at your doorstep, the people you run into at the store. Look at your city council, look at your county commissioners, and then you can bridge the rest of your ballot from there. But I'd start simple, I'd start small, I'd start with something that gives them ownership of the city that they want to live in. That would be my talk to them.
Awesome. Dr. Pugh, same question. What would you say to those voters?
And we're talking about the young voters.
The young voters. Yeah.
To what Dr. Jimmy said.
They kept stop calling me that.
I do. There's a part of me that, I mean, there's a lot of me that is inspired by, driven by, just energized by our young people. And the fact that they can stand up and they have that insult level, and they have that level where they're demanding respect. And we have to figure out how to, have these conversations and relationships with them, because it is hard. But I first of all, just having those conversations with them, letting them know what is at stake, finding out from them what is important, and being able to go from that space. But I'm always encouraging young people to get involved in the process. That young man who I told you that I spoke with, I told him, you can run for office. You can yourself. I gave him examples of how even students right here in Saginaw, when they were fighting around Saginaw High School. And when I say fighting, I mean fighting for a better school. Some years ago, it was a group called As One who joined together. You probably remember, but giving them different ways that they can get involved. And that young man started thinking about the lunches in his school, and that he didn't think that they had quality lunches, and that he wanted to know who he needed to talk to, and how does he begin advocating for himself and his fellow students. Get in right there, in those conversations. And I started having the conversation with him. He wanted to know, how long have you been on the State Board of Education? And we've had this problem for at least 10 years. You've been on the board for 10 years. So now he wants to know what have I done to make his lunches better? And so I was on the hook. So we had to have that conversation right there on site. And so just really making sure that we're tapping in, and what their issue is, that we're not taking it lightly, that we're showing them how right here, this is where you begin to get in and get involved, and why you have to be concerned about your decision makers, even at this level and at your school cafeteria. And so relationship, that's going to be my driving point here is having relationship.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Bishop, always come to you to bring us home. What are we missing? If you had one more statement that you could give to bring home the importance of this election and what's at stake, what would you tell that voter?
I would include everything that's already been said tonight in the positions that all of you have taken, but I would narrow it down to this. And it happened today. It actually happened. This conversation that you're talking about having with a young person happened today. I was walking out of a memorial service, and I walked into a young brother that I know well. I know him well, and I could see that he was frustrated. I said, "Dude, you look like you're frustrated, man." Yeah. I said, "Well, what's going on?" I said, "Well, tell me what's happening." Not much, I just, yeah. I said, "Okay, Doc. Tell you what. All I want you to do is just next time you see me, tell me what you think I can do to help you get to be as old as I am." That's all I said. He said, "Yeah. I want them to see them as me. And from the time that they have now, what can they do to make sure that when they get to be the age that I am, they won't have the feeling of regret because they could have changed something." This probably is, and we've said it so many times, that this is the most important election of our life. But I'm telling you, this is it, you all. When lies are being able to be told and nobody even challenges them, when you can be absolutely blatantly racist and it's okay, and when you can be diminished because you're speaking for yourself and telling the truth and nobody defends it, that tells us that we're at a time where the difference has got to be made. We got to draw the line. And the worst of it is, we could do it. We have the ability in the next few weeks to actually determine the outcome of what happens just by doing it.
Man, thank you so much, Bishop. Thank you so
Just
much.
if I may, I
Yes,
heard
please.
Dr. Jimmy say that he took his daughters to the poll. So it's no longer pick up the phone, call, have the conversations, but put people in the car and take them. We have those 9 days, and then we have November 5th. Take people. It's that important that we do that, and everything else that has been said, by Bishop and Dr. Jimmy, I concur with.
You could stop calling me.
I agree. Don't call Dr. Jimmy Dr. Jimmy. Just say doctor.
Yeah, right. I defer to the real doctor. She earned hers.
Yes. Oh man,
Jeff, I want to tell you how much I appreciate your leadership in making this happen. This conversation, Cap has just turned out to be such a powerful voice, and I love the fact that you guys have understood the lane that you're in, and I take full advantage of it. Thank you for even thinking that I would have an opportunity to add something to this conversation and inviting me.
Oh man, I appreciate it, man. We gonna keep working, and we got you in tow. So thank you so much for rocking with us. We appreciate it.
I would echo the same. I appreciate the audience. I said something earlier. I still would suggest that that the next time you have these kind of forums, that you have younger people engaged on here too. I think younger people would find it maybe not surprising that there are many of us who are more than willing to get the hell out of the way if they just step up. Absent them, something's got to be done. Leadership has to be done, has to be wielded. And so we stay in place until they come in. I have not ever had a young person come to me and ask me to move out of the way that I didn't gladly do so, or mentor to replace me. So I would still, for your young listeners out there, tell me where you can replace me, and I will gladly step aside.
Awesome. Any final thoughts, Dr. Pugh?
And again, I only raised this because I was just in an election and people felt so good that evening. And they felt like they did something good and that, we won. And we did win in some very key areas, but it just was not enough people. We won Saginaw, we won Bridgeport, we won many of the other townships. We won the space with the largest number of votes, the city of Flint. It is just that the turnout was abysmal. We didn't put people in the cars and make sure that they were getting out there to those polls. And there were people, again, who had so much going on that they didn't even realize that they had missed election day. And so don't take it for granted. Pick up the phone, call people, check when you're standing in the grocery line, talk to people. When you're standing in a line, I was in the there's what is it, Fork in Nigeria restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
And I was calling people, we need to be out here signing people up, telling them to go vote. Everywhere we are, we have to tell people, but put people in the cars starting October 26th through November 3rd. You can go and vote on Cass Street. Say that on repeat.
Yes, absolutely. I want to thank y'all for coming on, man. I appreciate it. Y'all, this is, I'm sharing my go-to group with the public because no matter what the issue is, I'm able to reach out to you guys, and you guys always deliver, and I appreciate your leadership, your wise counsel, and I'm sure our audience has appreciated your perspective as well. So thank you again, and thank you all for the audience. So many comments, I couldn't get to them, but I see them, and thank you so much for engaging with us. This has been another great Cap Talk Live. We'll have another one before the election comes because it's that important. And so I'm going to sign off now.
Jeff, can I say one more thing that I forgot?
Yes.
We have an amazing county clerk, Vanessa Guerrera. So
yes,
if there are any questions, her office is amazing. They have an amazing and impeccable reputation. And if anyone has any questions, I would suggest that they get in contact with the county clerk, Vanessa Guerrera, and her staff, Kyle Boswick.
Awesome. All right, y'all. We signing off. Thank you so much. God bless, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Thanks, Dr. Pugh.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.